Annabel James. Annabel, hi. I'll introduce you to the audience in just a short while I do all this sort of boring intro stuff. It's a live show, so we'd love you to join in. We're beaming out across multiple platforms, so on Facebook, on Twitter via Periscope, and he says like he knows what that is. Look how old I am. Do you think I know what that is? And on YouTube. I do know what YouTube is. So we're on all those channels. You can join us. I've got my team scanning the channels. And if you've got any thoughts or comments you want to share with us, pop them in there. And then they'll message them through to me. And we'll answer your questions. You can also join us live by giving us a call. Here's my phone ready to go. And the number is 07506 319 745. If you're calling from outside the UK, +44 7506 319 745. You can get us on WhatsApp if you like, save yourself the charges. So it'd be great to hear from you. Do drop us a message. And if I'm looking distracted at various times, it's because I find it difficult as a bloke. I find it difficult to do two things at once. So I sort of switch off and check my phone and then come back to the show. So don't be put off, and be lovely to hear from you. So do join in. If you're listening to this outside of a Wednesday evening between 9 and 10 UK time, don't do any of those things I just said, because it's a recording. I don't want you calling me because it could be 4 o'clock in the morning. So if it's live, join in. It'd be great to hear from you. Hello, Annabel. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you, Noel. How are you?
I'm great. You held that pose really well. Were you thinking of those cycle lanes? Was it building up the fury in you? And you were just like going, ah!
You started.
Don't get us started. We had, just before the show, we were talking about some of the effects of lockdown. In fact, we talked about a number of things. How has the pandemic been for you, Annabel?
It's been interesting, I think, like it has for everybody. I spent lockdown 1 down in Dorset with my dad.
Yeah.
I went for 3 weeks, came back 11 weeks later, which was interesting. I think in terms of what I do, running Age Space, COVID has been extraordinary for us. It's given us a platform, really, to reach loads more people, which has been fantastic in lots of ways, but that's obviously slightly double-edged.
Yeah. So you've been finding it okay during the pandemic? You've been able to sort of manage it?
I've been really lucky because I've worked all the way through.
Right.
And, you know, I think I've just been in the right place at the right time. So I think I've been really lucky, actually.
Yeah. And you're joining us tonight to talk about yourself, but also to talk about the organisation that you set up, which you've just mentioned, called Age Space, which is a resource, a support network for carers of older folk, yeah?
Absolutely, family members. I think carers is a slightly funny word, really. You know, I think I think of somebody who is paid. I think people like me and probably you and people listening family members don't think of themselves as carers. So we're really trying to provide support for people like me who find themselves looking after and supporting elderly parents and relatives.
Yeah. And so you've got a website, but you've also got some support groups that people can join as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. We've got the beginnings of a network of national local hubs online, which provide lots of information and local resources and local guides to services that are available for people.
Just because I think it's really important, I'm going to keep plugging it, and then we'll come back and plug it again once we've got to know you a little bit. But I think it's really, really important stuff. It's called Age Space. I've pulled up the website here, and we'll put a link in so that people can, maybe James can do that, or whoever's listening in. And it's www.agespace.org. So folks, get on that. I was saying, when I always do a sort of conversation before the show with people, and I was sort of looking at your website, and the first thing I said to you is, oh my God, there's loads on it. It's absolutely jam-packed with information, and really, really useful information. I've been sort of just looking at it. So you've got the regional age space hubs, you've got the Charter for Change, you've got some video about what you do, spotlight, preventing falls, hiring a carer, providing care home top tips, practical tips to consider in a medical. It just goes on and on and on. And it's just really helpful stuff.
Thank you. Well, that's sort of where we started, really. It was very much, we wanted to sort of recreate the conversations that you have with friends about subjects that you maybe don't know much about. So we want to be able to people to be able to find all sorts of information. I think quite often when you find yourself in the position that, you know, I did, my mum had a stroke, and I felt that we didn't really know what we were doing. We didn't know anything about care. We didn't know where to find care. We didn't know what questions to ask. And I think as we talked around friends and colleagues, you know, it seemed that lots of us were in the same position. You quite often find yourself catapulted into these situations where, and it's really difficult because care is multifaceted. So I think we wanted to try and give as much help and information and guidance as we could, even if you don't really know what you're looking for, if you see what I mean, when you start.
Yeah, and actually sort of having browsed through the website, I was like, that is a good place to start because it's got everything on it and you don't really need to know anything. It's actually going to throw ideas at you about ways of thinking. And you just began to tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this, which was obviously you're a family member. So what happened? How did you...
Well, my mum had a stroke. At that stage, she and Dad were mid-late 70s, enjoying their retirement, very healthy, very happy. So none of us were thinking about anything, you know, other than them having a nice time. And then overnight, everything changed. Yeah. And she spent a long time in hospital. Dad, you know, essentially became her carer overnight. And I felt that we'd sort of, you know, subsequently to that, when she came home, I just felt that we'd sort of I personally felt I sort of failed them both, really. I didn't know what a stroke was. I didn't really understand what we were getting into. Didn't know the questions to ask in the hospital. I didn't know what things we needed to do at home to make it better for her. And, you know, I felt we kind of stumbled our way through endless sort of iterations of a situation that, as it transpired, millions of people find themselves in, you know, probably in slightly different circumstances. And I felt that we were always playing catch up. And I think, you know, people don't talk about later life. We're not very good at it in the UK. No. You know, we're a bit stiff upper lip about it. And we don't have those conversations in families. And I think so many people end up in a bit of a panic, in a bit of an emergency, thinking, oh God, what do we do? And so a friend and I started to think, and she'd had a very similar experience with her dad, but a very different experience as well. And the more we talked around the subject, the more we wondered, you know, this is a problem here. We don't really think there's an answer. So maybe we can provide one. So we did loads of research. And we looked at charities. You know, there are loads of charities doing amazing work, like Age UK and Dementia UK and the Stroke Association. But actually, care is all interconnected with a load of other things. It's interconnected with funding and financing care and lots of legal stuff around getting older, about power of attorney if somebody can't make their own decisions anymore. And everything's really interrelated. And we just felt that maybe there was a way to deliver kind of a trusted guide, if you like, for people. And I think Mumsnet was our sort of light bulb moment, really, having kind of researched all sorts of things. We just wondered whether, you know, something like Mumsnet for the middle-aged was a place to start, which is kind of where it started, really. And it's gone from there, which is, you know, fascinating. So I started knowing very, very little. 4 years in, I know a bit more. But, you know, like most things, you learn new stuff every day.
So it's the core of it then is this group of family members who found themselves in this situation, all trying to just sort of give each other information and support.
You know, our core is very much, you know, people trying to look after their elderly parents. Right. And we've got a forum where people can go on and ask questions. And we've got lots of local hubs. So people interact in different ways, really. I mean, some people just come and find information and go. And some people come onto our Facebook group and, you know, have a chat there, or they come to the forum. You know, we haven't really worked out whether we want to provide, you know, we don't provide a helpline service yet. That might be something that we do in the future, or, you know, even if not a consultancy service, but actually giving people help. Yeah. That's something we're kind of moving towards, I think. But, you know, as a small startup, we've got to start somewhere, really. And I think for me, it was about trying to create as much useful information on the website as step one, if you like. And then we can see where we go from there.
Do you mind if we go into your experience of sort of what happened around your mum a little bit, and maybe offer people some identification who are finding it? Because I mean, I come at it as a professional who, one of the things my company does is we pull together care teams for caring for people in their homes, and I find it complicated. And you know, I've got a postgraduate qualification, I've got almost 30 years professional experience of putting teams. I was telling you just before the show, I was the senior manager in social services for 15 years. And so I'm used to doing this stuff, but even I find it complicated. I actually can't imagine how difficult it must be if you're a family member suddenly confronted with trying to navigate all this stuff. And do you remember what it was like? I mean, you must have literally wanted to shoot yourself at some point, I would imagine.
I think it's, well, you know, as with all things, you kind of get through it, don't you? You know, you just kind of struggle on. My dad is absolutely amazing. My mum died a couple of years ago now, so he's on his own. But, you know, he looked after her for 10 years and he was extraordinary. And so I was very much, you know, as the supporter. I wasn't the direct carer. And also I live in London and they're in Dorset. But I think I felt that we were endlessly casting. I think we always felt that we were just one step behind the curve, at least. We couldn't see ahead. We couldn't work out where we might go next, what might happen next. So I felt we were always maybe a bit late in making decisions, or, you know, waiting for things to get better and then they didn't. And then you're making decisions on the hoof in a bit of a panic, thinking, I don't know if this is the right decision or not. So I think you end up finding, I think I've ended up feeling quite guilty a lot of the time that, you know, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right place? Am I there enough? Are we doing enough? Is she happy? Are they happy? What more can I do? And you just find yourself, I think, endlessly casting around, trying to do the right fit, trying to do the best you can for your family, which is what everybody does.
And did you have lots of feelings? I imagine you did have some about, I don't know how to do this. I'm not good enough. I'm failing. I'm not being a good enough daughter here. I should be doing more.
Oh, yes. I mean, and I know that, you know, the kind of the not good enough daughter thing is I think is well documented, really. And in fact, when we started, we looked at, we actually ran a blog for a while called the Bad Daughters Club, which was trying to take a slightly wry view about all of this stuff and try and move us all on from the feelings of guilt and angst that, you know, I think beset all of us.
Yeah.
So absolutely, yeah, that in spades. I think there was a piece of research that I think someone in Harvard did, that said the best insurance for elderly parents or for our aging population isn't money, it's a good daughter.
Right.
But then I know lots of people with lots of sons who are also, you know, I think, you know what I mean. I think it's.
I know what you mean. I mean, we've reached a stage in the sort of care of the elderly in the UK where, without a doubt, it's gone into professionalising family members and sort of skilling up family members to become carers, professional carers, because the elderly population is growing, as we know. And despite the various reports and inquiries, and I've actually been at the presentations around those reports and inquiries, it still continues to be the case. And I think there's a big issue around it currently in terms of the coronavirus and how care towards the elderly is packaged in the UK, and which has led to some of the reasons for the high level of deaths initially in the sort of first wave. Was because of our use of care homes and the care services, which is relatively odd and unique in Europe. So the way we do it. So in Italy, it's much more common for the elderly to be within their family home.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so here it's very different. But more and more the family is expected to sort of take the lead, which does lead to an awful lot of emotional pressure, I think. And how did you navigate it, apart from your humour, which I think is clearly a big part of your life?
We talked a lot. actually, and we got planning. I have to say, I would never be called by anybody a planner. My dad and my brother are much more efficient and organised than I am. But between us, we had those conversations about what to do and how to do it, and where things were, and what if, and what when. And I think that made life a lot easier. I think to have things in place like a power of attorney, and to know who the neighbours were, who we could call, to what meds mum was on, or I think from little tiny things to the really big stuff. I think actually feeling that you were a little bit organised made life much easier to deal with, I think.
And is it, I mean, are you as a family, do you find it easy to communicate anyway?
Yes, I think we probably do. But I mean, the first time Dad wanted to discuss his will with me, he phoned me up in the week and said, we're going to talk about this. And I went, all right. And I was in an absolute panic about it for days, because I just had no idea how to handle that conversation, because I felt we were talking about the death word. and I didn't want to sort of, well, I didn't really know. I didn't know how the conversation might go, actually. So it was, but actually, once we started, we couldn't stop. And now we, all bets are off. We talk about everything and anything, really. But, you're
negotiating these days with him about what goes in for you.
Kind of. No, we're kind of beyond the will, I mean, But I think that every conversation is open, actually. But we've had to get better at it, for sure. And I think you need to, because your relationship totally changes. I mean, I'm not parenting my dad by any stretch, but our relationship has certainly changed from father-daughter into something slightly different, and navigating that and negotiating that has been, I mean, it's been relatively straightforward for us, for sure. But I know from lots of people we talk to that is not the case by all. And I think that's, the family issues are really, as you will know much better than I, really deep-seated, deep-rooted, and can be really, really difficult to manage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the big trip up. What's coming to mind is I'm remembering the conversation. My mum died a long time ago, when I was quite young. I was, I think, 23 or something. The conversation that was the weirdest conversation, and it still is to this day, the weirdest conversation I've ever had, and is in that category, was when she talked to me about the day she died and would I phone the undertakers. And not in a million years that I ever planned to have a conversation like that with my mum. But yet she needed to know. Yeah. She needed to know that somebody would keep their head and actually phone the undertakers, and she chose me. And I was sort of like, okay, I'll do that if you want, but I'm sort of really feeling uncomfortable about this whole thing. And of course, I did it on the day when she died. I did it because she'd asked me to. But that was really, really weird. And you're nodding and smiling in identification there.
Totally. I think it's, you end up having conversations that you, in a million years, you never thought you'd have. And actually, I think most of us hopefully deal with them, okay. But I know it's not easy for lots of people, actually. So, but
I think where there is family discord, it gets about a million times more complicated.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, one of the great things somebody told me, which I love, and I tell lots of people, if you're worried about how to manage all of this stuff within a family, a really good way to think about it is almost becoming like a management group for your parents. So you almost become the company of mum and dad. And, there may be a sibling who's a financy person. They do the money. Somebody goes by, they can deal with the house and stuff. Somebody else deals with respite care. So everybody's got a role to play, and you're not all jumping over each other or equally running away from each other, in terms of making decisions. That has always struck me as, if you can do that, if things aren't great, and that's a way forward, that seems like a really practical way.
It's a really lovely way of thinking about it. And I think I'm going to steal that from you, if you don't mind,
Okay.
to suggest it to people, because what it sounds like is the process we do as professionals, which is what we call a multi-team meeting.
Yes.
We just pull the teams together and coordinate. And I can tell you from the professional perspective, the single most important thing to do is get people talking and communicating, whether it be family members or professionals. And getting people sharing information. It's the sort of lack of communication is the killer, I think, every single time. I mean, you seem to me, I mean, you didn't come into this caring role skipping and jumping. It's not your natural
I did.
You liar, and you're a bad liar as well. Your schnauzer is sort of grinning at you in the background.
Yeah.
You're lying to your team. What was your background? I mean, I know you were in radio for a while, but tell us a bit more.
Well, I do have a caring, sharing background because I was in charities for a long time. I did when I left uni, I went into PR back in the 80s. Big shoulder pads, power lunches, all that jazz.
Yeah, that's what's shining through at the moment, it has to be said.
And I was distinctly average at that. And
I'm sure you weren't.
No, I think I probably was. And then I jumped ship. I did a bit of PR for a couple of charities, and then I moved into fundraising, having always been slightly nervous that fundraising was selling, and I thought, oh God, I don't want to do that. And I loved it. So I worked at the NSPCC for a long time, and then I went to Capital Radio and ran all their charity stuff for a long time. And then I worked for myself for about 10 years, working with lots of companies on their charitable giving, and then lots of charities on how to raise more money and do things better. So there is a caring, sharing thread in there.
That's tough work though, sort of raising money for charities. It's not easy.
Well, I think it's like anything really. I think, there are ways to go about it that make it easier. And, it depends on the issue. And I've worked for a few charities that are harder to raise money for than others.
Yeah.
That way.
Yeah. It's still quite a competitive market though, I think, is I guess what I think is that, I mean, the NSPCC, something like that, has such a strong brand, I guess, that, but because it's so big, I could imagine it's sort of, the amount of money it gets through is huge. And
that was always quite, I had quite a few people wag their finger at me going, do you take a salary? And I'd sort of say, well, I do have to live. Yeah. Organisations the size of the NSPCC, they run like businesses, they enormous sums of money and responsibilities and that sort of thing. It's sort of, there's a weird dichotomy, I think, sometimes between what people expect from a charity and the kind of the harsh reality of it. I think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the board of a charity at the moment, and we have to pay the bills, and we have professionals who work for us and all that sort of stuff. And you can't be fluffy when somebody's got to pay their mortgage on the salary that they get from you. Do you know what
exactly.
I mean? So, yeah. Absolutely. And sort of, why did you move into the charitable sector? What was it that was drawing you into that, do you think?
I don't know, really. I think I've always been interested. I mean, I think when I would, even in my corporate gig days, I did quite a lot of community relations, it was called in those days.
Yeah.
I think, I suppose, I think I've always felt, well, I should have gone to work in the city, really. Those were the days in the 80s. Yeah. I didn't think I could do the maths.
You had the shoulder pads, so you could have got away with it on that basis.
And I think for me, what I'm very interested in is why people connect with different causes, and how do you build on that relationship? How do you make that relationship work for the donor or the partner and the organisation? And I think it's a really curious relationship sometimes. And I guess that for me has always been at the heart of it's just nosiness, really. Why do people get involved?
And why do you think people did? Why were people getting involved in your experience?
Well, my experience, such as it is there will always be a connection for somebody between them and the cause, and you may never know what that is directly, but I guess someone like the NSPCC, part of your induction as a staff member is people, as they tell you, that people who have perhaps been subjected to abuse, and if they come across the NSPCC, quite often things get triggered.
Yeah.
They come to a fundraising evening, just for fun or what have you, and somebody says something and it triggers a memory, and they may not have talked about their experience forever, and then suddenly you're off on a kind of conversation with somebody who then needs to talk about what has happened to themselves, even though they may, and I wasn't sure. Well, I thought, oh, this is my induction. This is not going to happen. I'm a fundraiser. I'm not going to meet anybody like that. And of course I did a lot.
Yeah.
And it was slightly terrifying, but because, these people, suddenly stuff comes to the surface that they may not have thought about for decades. And it was also it was incredibly powerful for me to sort of witness, really. I think it was really humbling, is a strange word. It gets used in different contexts, but it really was, actually. I think just to get, because what we were then able to do quite often is give those people, the support that they needed to deal with some of the stuff they dealt with. So it was just really interesting. Sorry, that's a long-winded way of answering your question.
No, I mean, it's interesting because oddly enough, I'm interested in people. Given what I do for a living, it helps. Sort of being disinterested. I wouldn't be very good at my job, but I'm intrigued as well by these things. So what draws people into things? I'm also intrigued because your response to the situation with your mum and dad wasn't simply to just get through it. Something in you made you want to do something to improve the situation. And I guess part of the conversation we're having with you now is to try and understand what that something is. Because for a lot of people, I think, confronted with the situation you were, just simply being able to put things in place and just go, phew, that's that done. Mum's okay, dad's okay, great, off I go. But somehow you wanted to do more than that. And you have, and you've done a fantastic job, and you continue to be interested in improving those services. And I'm quite intrigued in rumbling around inside you and figuring out if we can sort of figure out, was there a sort of, I mean, in terms of your parents and your background and your brother, I mean, tell us that story. I mean, was there a sort of, was there a sort of social conscience, a particular social conscience in the family, a sort of a commitment to church and state?
Anybody else? I think my parents are just sort of regular, really. Really, I think for me, it's about
a London girl. Was it a London family, or were you out in Dorset?
A bit of both, actually. A bit of London, bit of here and there. I think I'm a bit sort of bloody-minded, really, and I quite like things. I like to solve things. I like things to be better for people. And I think that's kind of where it comes from, really. I think it's, we could have a go at this and see if we can do something a bit different, or make it better.
Where did you go to school? Was it in London, or was it?
No, I went to school in Salisbury in Wiltshire.
Ah, okay. I know Salisbury very well. Very beautiful out there.
Yeah.
Which school did you go to?
I went to the Godolphin.
Ah, I wondered. It was it's a well-known school. Were your parents based out there at the time in Guildford? That was Salisbury.
No, but out in Buckinghamshire. So I was a boarding school.
Right. How did you find that?
I loved it.
Did you?
Oh, loved it. Yeah.
Great.
Because of course, I grew up in Enid Blyton and Mallory Towers.
Absolutely. Lashings of ginger beer.
All of that. Yeah. So I was very happy. Thank you.
And so you enjoyed sort of boarding school and that experience. I mean, they are quite interesting places in terms of the sort of values that they instill in their boarders. Is that where you got that from, or was that where you got the bloody mindedness from?
Probably a bit of both, actually.
I'm sure.
Well, really, boarding school is great. It's not for everybody. It makes you very independent. I think it makes you quite self-contained. And I think all of that kind of adds to the mix, probably.
Right. And did you come out of that quite one of those quite focused young ladies who really clear? No.
So I had no idea what was I going to do. Qualified for nothing.
You did A levels, and then what? You went on to university, or?
Went to university.
Great.
Which I loved, of course. I was very lucky. I had a great time.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know what I wanted to do. In those days, I don't know if they still do the milk round at uni. I applied for Thompson Media graduate program, and I applied for the Mars graduate program, and I had an interview with Mars. And 3 days before, I'd trodden on a wine glass at a party and got the stem of the wine glass through my foot.
Oh, ouch.
And so it ended up in the local hospital having, 2 or 3 stitches, I think. So I was on crutches and it was snowing. And I managed to get down to some hotel outside Heathrow for the Mars first round of marketing graduates. And there were 50 people in the room, and when you're 51st on the list. And I was at least 53rd on the list.
Yeah.
And I got absolutely no concession for being on crutches. But they were very nice at the end and said it was very lovely of me to come, and they hoped that I'd had a good day. But they were, quite rightly, really, there were lots of people there who, that's what they were much more focused than I was.
Yeah. So what did you do next after? Where did you hobble off?
PR, which is what we all did, really. If you didn't go into the city, you went into PR.
Right.
So I worked for big agencies for, 6 or 7 years, I suppose.
Yeah. But that was unsatisfying.
Well, it was fine to start with. And I loved it. But they were very big companies, and they changed their structures. And, I think part of the bloody mindedness probably is I'm not very good at office politics. And, I just didn't really enjoy it very much, actually, eventually.
Yeah.
So I did take a year off, actually, when I was about 27, and went to Australia for a year and had a lovely time. Worked in a bar in the middle of the rainforest in northern Queensland, which I loved.
Yeah.
Just as the first Gulf War was underway.
Wow.
So there was a bit of a recession going on, and it was quite hard to find a job. So I went to Bristol for a couple of years. And then I didn't like being in Bristol anymore. So then I joined Rally International, which used to be Operation Rally.
Yeah.
And I spent 6 or 7 months in Southern Africa as a press officer on various expeditions, which I loved. That was a sort of youth development charity, sending young people to places like Zimbabwe and Botswana and Namibia to do community projects like build clinics in the middle of nowhere, or work on conservation projects with elephants and stuff. Just great stuff. Sort of team building and character building and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then I ran their press office in London for a couple of years, which I loved. Really interesting. But they didn't really pay very much money.
Yes.
So I then went back into PR again for a few more years until I really realised that I really was very average at it. And then I went to the NSPCC, and the rest is sort of history, really.
And you found your sort of niche, I guess, in the charitable sector.
Yeah, I think so. It's a world that I feel quite comfortable in. My involvement initially was in corporate fundraising.
Yeah.
So for me, I quite like that mixture of quite corporate or quite charitable, and bringing the two together. So that's always appealed to me, really, in terms of how companies engage with.
I can imagine you're very good at sort of understanding the corporate types and sort of getting them to open their pockets, and they were sort of understanding how.
Well, it depends, really. I think these days it's quite prescribed. You know, there are ways in, and there are ways companies want to do things, and that can be quite frustrating, I think. I think, you know, volunteering is big in corporate life, which is brilliant. But it's can be quite frustrating if, you know, somebody wants to send you their top corporate team for a day.
Paint a wall or something.
And painting walls is what they want.
That was always what they seem to want to do in the projects I worked on. Have you got any walls you want painted? Not this week.
Yeah. To be fair, there's much less of that these days. But I think it's still quite difficult to navigate your way so it's valuable for everybody, really. I think, you know, it's really difficult.
Yeah. But you found your niche in the sort of charitable sector.
Yeah, I think so.
And sort of grew. NSPCC, who else did you work for?
Capital Radio, Help London Child.
Yeah.
And then for about 10 years, I did all sorts of different things. I worked with Alzheimer's Society, quite a few international charities, quite a few local ones in London. Just, you know, gun for hire, really, to be honest. But charities interested me and, you know, that wanted to work with me. So I was really lucky, actually. Full range.
And then you went to set up your own, is this as a freelancer or are you working for?
Yeah, I set up a company, but, you know, mostly on my own, but I'd bring in other people, really, which was really interesting. It's the first time I'd not been an employee.
Right.
Quite a change that I don't think I quite reckoned how big that transition would be, actually, from getting a check every month to having to really graft for it. And I loved it, but I found, you know, you've got to be, you know, it's sort of slightly all or nothing, really. You know, you say yes to everything, and then you're so busy you can't do the networking anymore, so you've got nothing to say yes to because you're not doing the networking to meet anybody to say yes to. And then you've got no work, and then you've got to get networking again. And, you know, it becomes a bit of a roller coaster until you get, well, it was for me, until I kind of got used to it, I think.
Yeah.
And got better at managing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And managing the anxiety. I mean, I think that's the big thing.
Yeah.
When people have their own company is sort of trusting that things will come, that you don't have to just keep grabbing everything that somebody offers and sort of squirreling it away. So you've got these big cheeks full of stuff, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I did pretty much launch my business the week of the financial crash in 20. And in fact, in the October, I think, when, I don't know, somebody like, not Merrill Lynch, but one of those big American banks went under, I was giving a presentation on corporate fundraising on the 28th floor in Canary Wharf, thinking, okay, this is going to go really well.
But you've got through that, so well done for you. Yes, I mean, because I've worked in the charitable sector a lot, I've worked with, not you particularly, but I've worked with people with your skill set, and I can sort of attest to how invaluable somebody with your skill set is, and how most charities try and get you for free as well. Would you mind joining our board? Because you're really good with funding, so it's like, I'm sure you get 1,000,001 invitations to join various people's boards once they read your CV. But it's sort of interesting, I think, just bringing within that context, you know, quite a sort of hard-nosed attitude, because money is hard-nosed. You really have to get it right, into an area, charitable work, where the actual end product isn't necessarily hard-nosed. It's much more fluffy and human, and it has to be messy to sort of be effective in many ways. It can't be like a corporate approach. It's, you know, the actual front line of charities can't be streamlined, otherwise they wouldn't be effective, essentially. And it seems to me there's something like that dynamic going on when you're a family member suddenly faced with, you know, a caring crisis. You've got to, in some ways, be quite hard-nosed about things, but you can't be hard-nosed about it because it's somebody that you love and care about.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, it has to be messy and muddy and human, doesn't it?
Totally. And I think I think that's really interesting. I think maybe that has been easier for me coming from the background that I've had, but I think I know from just talking from lots of people that they find that really difficult because, you know, in a corporate life, it's, you know, quite a lot more structure and it's all a bit clean and it's a bit nice and it's a bit, you know, whereas, as you say, all of this stuff is really messy and really muddy. And that's quite a big transition to make, I think, for anybody, actually. So, yeah, I think it's really hard. And it's chaos, I think, haven't you? You've got to be able to you've got to be able to manage that in your own head. And I think that can be really difficult.
And also the whole thing about the person being cared for and respecting the fact that, you know, they need to be the people defining the care, not me.
No, it's the sort of does he take sugar thing, really. Yeah. And it's really easy to go, oh no, we're going to do that because that's so much better for them. And it's like, well, who are you talking about? And have they, you know, are they involved? And it's, I think that's really interesting. I think, and maybe on the other side of that slightly as well, is that I'm also really conscious that there's a danger that Dad and I only ever talk about appointments or medication or this, that, and the other, as opposed to Donald Trump or what Bojo said this afternoon or what's happening in the garden or what's happening on the village. And I think that's really easy as well. It's really finding that balance between being a carer and being a family member and, you know, not just being totally focused on the care either. Yeah. And the quality of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were saying that, you know, you just mentioned sort of bringing us up to date, as it were, with some of the insanity in the world. Don't get me started on that. I'm completely blown away by this guy sort of and his ability to ignore reality. But there you go. That's another conversation. Yeah. But you know, coming up today, you're saying that, and let's talk about this a little bit about what's going on at the moment in terms of, you know, the whole issue of shielding and caring and the impact that the pandemic has had on the sort of cohort that specifically you look at, which are the sort of family members trying to navigate support and care for their frail elderly relatives. So tell us some of the sort of impacts that the pandemic since March really has been having in your experience, and sort of how, as a service, you're having to adapt and how you have adapted to that sort of situation. So we all know what the situation was before, and then suddenly this terrifying thing happened, and it became really clear really quickly that it was more terrifying the older you were, and the more additional complications you had on top of your age. So if you had a stroke and if you had dementia and if you had the risks for you from infection got worse and worse and worse and worse. And so what was that like in terms of what were people telling you about their experience during that time?
It was really interesting because I think for about a week, I think we were all slightly going, oh my God, what happened? What do we do? What happens? Yeah.
And a lot of people experience this thing where they're sort of, the waters receded and it got really oddly quiet for a while. Like that image you see of a tsunami when the waves, the water disappears and then suddenly was it a bit like that? Is that?
It was really. And I think, you know, there were all sorts of different things. I think the most questions we got asked about were what people could and couldn't do. You know, although the rules were really clear, people were still unsure, and because they were frightened of doing the wrong thing. and they just didn't know how to manage mum being 100 miles up the road on her own, frail. Could they go? Couldn't they go? Could they go in the garden? Could they go to the gate? Those sorts of questions, even though it was incredibly clear what people could and couldn't do. So at one level it was that. But I think on the other level, which of course we all saw, which was really extraordinary, was just how the shielding happened locally, how, we've got a WhatsApp group on my road, so everybody was looking out for the older people in our street, did people need shopping, did people need medication, blah, 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 blah. And that just happened everywhere. I mean, that was extraordinary, I think. And people were really so keen to get involved, I think, and do their bit. I think, the wash up after this, how it all worked in care homes is a whole other can of worms, unfortunately. I find it extraordinary, really, that both particularly in care homes, but also, that we've left lots of people on their own for months, really. I know we had to do it, but you kind of feel, did we not see how this was going to work out?
Did you see the thing on about the old lady that was handcuffed because she was going to pick up her mother? Shocking image, and they were clearly wrong to handcuff the woman, without doubt. The police officer in question is bonkers. But that action was born of exactly what you're saying, which is, my mum's been in this place for X amount of months. Here we are going into a second lockdown, and you're going to tell me it's going to go on a bit longer.
Yeah, and I think people are absolutely desperate, quite right. And it's, but, I don't know, you hear all sorts of different stories. You hear some care homes that are doing absolutely more than they can, and family members have been allowed to visit. It might be at a window, but at least they have been able to see somebody all the way through. Others haven't seen anybody for months, and then there's the whole range in between, really. And it's just horrifying that we seem to be unable. It kind of goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about family members being formalized carers, and yet a family member is not able to be a key worker, or whatever the term is you choose. Exactly. In a care home.
There's no legal rights. You have all the responsibilities, but none of the legal rights.
Yeah. And that seems to be, that really goes to the heart of the conversation, I think, really, about how we look after our elderly population going forwards, really. If we learn nothing from all of this, that has to be, how we deal with family members, how we look at family members, how we value family carers, and all that stuff. And it just seems
because one of my specialisms, which is mental health, we deal with this thing called the Mental Health Act. And you come across legislation all the time. I know you do. And it's one of the big shocks I know as a professional carer. It's one of the big shocking things that people have to learn about is all the legislation that exists around what you can and can't do, and how you access services. And it's absolutely, you sort of end up wanting to pull your teeth out. It's so difficult to sort of understand. But one of the big pieces of legislation I deal with is this thing called the Mental Health Act. And most people have heard of this odd term being sectioned, which is it's a bizarre term. It's what it means is there's a specific section 3 of the Mental Health Act, which allows doctors to take away your freedom because they think you're a risk to yourselves or others because of your mental health condition. Up until this year, February of this year, family were not included in that. They were specifically excluded from any decision making. And it was only this year, I think it was in February this year, just before the pandemic, the Mental Health Act was changed to allow the family to be included in decision making with the patient. And that's how far we are behind. Yet, I can tell you as a professional who's got 30 years experience, the family have always cared for people and have always been expected to.
Yeah, of course. And to some extent, absolutely, you wouldn't want it any other way. It's what families do, isn't it? But it's the I think it's the lack of support for family members, and the lack of recognition, not medals and shiny stars, but just the sort of understanding really about what that means. And I think, employers, are getting better at things like care, but it's not like maternity and paternity leave. It's still really at the employer's behest, just being able to take time off work.
Yeah.
And if we've got an aging workforce and an aging population, this is another thing that we're going to have to really get to grips with is, how do we let people work and care? Because nobody else is going to do it,
Yeah.
So, yeah, don't get me started.
No, I do want to get you started. We've still got plenty of time. I'm just thinking about in terms of the feedback you're getting from the sort of your support networks. I mean, how are people managing these issues now at the moment? So is it different now from the beginning of the pandemic? Are people learning and adapting?
I think lockdown 2 is quite different for most people at some level.
Okay.
In that, you can be in a bubble. If you live on your own, you can be in a bubble with another family or family member.
Yes.
You can go out for a walk with somebody else, and the shops are open. There is a bit, you remember back in the day in April and May, you could hear a pin drop outside.
Yeah.
Very little open and you couldn't go anywhere. So I think, the parameters are slightly different now. But if you're frail and elderly and you're not very mobile and it's dark at 5 o'clock and it's raining, not much is probably, and actually you've probably been shielding since March and you never really came out of it. Yeah. Life changed a great deal. I think we all know that the local resources work now. The great local deliveries, and I think the neighbourhood WhatsApp groups are still going, and people I think are much more conscious. But I think people's concern now is really about how people are going to come out of all of this in terms of their mental health, particularly. Yeah. And how we look after them, because it's going to be, the notion of a vaccine has given us all a massive boost this week, and God, it can't come fast enough, really. But if we have too much more of this lockdown release thing, the detriment is just going to be massive, I think, isn't it?
Well, it is. I'm telling you, it already is. I genuinely, my heart goes out to people who are shielding and older people who sort of I suppose that there's an interesting conversation here for me about this whole issue. We fought for many, many years for this quality of life stuff. That, in terms of provision of care or medical services, it shouldn't just be a slop on a plate. It's got to be delivered, and people have got to be supported in a way that respects their rights and enhances dignity and enhances quality of life. And quite frankly, to preserve life because of the virus, all of that stuff went out the window. So this notion of choice, this notion of dignity, this notion of quality, and if you're a carer in a care home, I'm not attacking anybody here, but actually, what I'm saying is the truth, that because of the public health measures, a lot of hard-won changes in the way that we treat people who are vulnerable and in need of support in terms of quality and decision making and planning, etc., have gone out the window because there's this bigger thing called this virus, and there are some, I think, significant questions to be asked around that. My personal view is that although at times things have been shambolic, at least the conversation's been happening with the government.
Yeah.
They've been open to the idea that we could be going too far, folks, and that we shouldn't just automatically assume that locking everything down is the appropriate response to things, because people die for other reasons as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I wouldn't be in their position. The choices are almost impossible, really, aren't they?
I think so, but I also think there's some really important sort of rights questions coming out of this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've made public health decisions which are rational, they make sense, and they protect people. They've definitely protected services, you know, the NHS, etc., which should have been, but there has been a cost.
Total, yeah, enormous. Yeah, absolutely.
And we need to look at that, I think, and sort of, because there will be other situations come up like this. And I think you're right, what you said about, you know, the fact the vaccine is here for you. It really can't come quick enough, and we need to, rather than shield people, we need to vaccinate them so they can get their bloody lives back.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, and we need to remove the fear. In terms of just you personally, though, has it been quite a fearful experience for you, or are you one of those people that's just gone, an emergency, I'm going to grow and develop and sort of learn a billion different new skills?
No, definitely. I haven't learned any new skills, I'm afraid. Do you know, I think like everybody, you know, some weeks are better than others.
Yeah.
I mean, the weekend before lockdown 2 started, I felt really quite frazzled. I just thought, you know, it came out on the Friday night, Bojo spoke on the Saturday, and all that weekend I just felt really, really off key, really off balance.
Yeah.
And it's just the not knowing, actually, isn't it? When it says, okay, we're going to start on Thursday and it's going to be like this, and you go, okay, I'll go to the supermarket and then we'll get into it. And I think it's just about, you know, I think it was all those moments of real uncertainty maybe that were really the worst for me personally.
Yeah.
I have never been, touching wood, particularly worried that I'll get it badly. I have no idea why I think that, except that I'm not 80, so maybe, you know. And I, you know, but I think I think also maybe one underestimates the drip effect of 8 months of, you know, everybody being a lot of people being fairly anxious, myself included.
Yeah.
How that will manifest itself.
I mean, I'm tired. My anxiety levels the last few days went through the roof. It's calming down again, and I know it's a direct result of the fact that we're getting danger signals again, and inevitably that's what's going on. I'm tired of it all as well. I mean, I'm sort of really, really fed up of it now.
Yeah.
I understand it intellectually and emotionally and all that sort of stuff, and I do all the right things to look after myself, but I'm dog tired of the situation. And wanted to move on, and I miss the people that I care about. My boy lives in France with his mum, and it's not legal for me to travel over there at the moment, and I probably wouldn't be, but the fact that it's not legal for me to do is annoying me.
Yeah.
Sort of, it's all of that sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's
totally. I think absolutely. It's weird, isn't it? It's weird. I mean, I feel like, but equally it's fantastic. It's been a great way to cull the address book.
There's always a silver lining somewhere.
There's always a silver lining. But no, I think the vaccine, bloody hell, we need it.
Okay. So I just want to plug your services again and your website and what you do before we finish, because we're essentially at the end of the show. I told you we'd fly by. So they can get hold of you on your website, which is agespace.org. Yeah? Yep. Do you have a sort of digital footprint anywhere else that we could just sort of let people know, a Facebook page or anything like that?
We have a Facebook page, Age Space.
Okay.
We have a Twitter feed. I think that's Age Space as well. And I think we're kind of flirting with Instagram, but we haven't really cemented the relationship yet. So not there yet.
We can find you on Facebook and on Twitter, and I'm sure my team will sort of put the links on there so that they can follow you. And we have a Facebook group for coronavirus, which is, I can't actually remember now. I'm sorry. It might be off the Age Space
Facebook group, but there is one about helping elderly parents with coronavirus, I think. Something like that. Sorry.
We shall find it for you.
Sorry.
And send it out as links. Annabel, it's been lovely to see. I mean, you're sort of very sort of sensible, Georgie lashings of ginger beer attitude has shone through. The matrons at your original boarding school are sort of well served by your sort of practical, emotional approach to things, and the contribution that you've made. Genuinely, I mean, you undermine it, but I happen to know, having spent many years in this field and understanding something about the third sector, as it's called, the charitable sector, that folk like yourselves are absolutely crucial. And without you, it would fold. So I happen to know that, and I'm sure you're going to be very British about it and deny that completely. So, you know, I'm going to thank you on behalf of all those charities that you have helped, and on behalf of this new venture, which is phenomenal, folks. I mean, really get onto the website. It's one of the most helpful websites I've ever come across, actually, in this field. And I'm sort of, like I say, I'm a care coordinator. That's, you know what a care coordinator is. That's what I do for a living. And I'm going to be using your website to figure out how to do my job. So it's a really, really good piece of work. And thanks very much for coming on, Annabel. It's been great.
Thank you.
And good luck with the rest of your lockdown. I hope you have a lovely Christmas as a family.
You too.
And thanks everybody for joining us. We shall see you next week. And yet again, I have not remembered who's on, but there you go. I never do. So nothing new. Been wonderful to have everybody with us. We shall see you same bat time, same bat channel next Wednesday. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.